I'm very excited for this next conversation. We're going to get into real stories of what people are doing to generate these results. So with that, I'd love to introduce this next panel to come on up with John Williams, Ryan Depew, Heather Roth, and my personal friend, Matt Gray. Hey, thank you. Welcome. Thank you. Welcome. Let's go, John. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, that was an amazing keynote, and I think one of the things that's hard for me is I try to take notes when Jeff is talking through all that stuff. It's so much changes as we see the technology being rolled out. So very excited to be able to talk today about separating hype from outcomes. So my name is Matthew Gray. I head up partnerships for Tealium. And I think when I took down some of the notes from this session, the quote by Scott Brinker that was, "The data layer is where AI succeeds or fails," is a very interesting kind of thing to post out there in the public domain. Because one of the things I see is we've built the infrastructure, we've invested in the platforms, we have the data, and we're collecting this, but besides all the technology and the assembly of data, I feel like the decisions that are there to be able to unlock the data, we're really finding that a lot of these AI initiatives are trapped in the pilot phase. And this is something that's been very interesting and intriguing for me. And like Jeff had mentioned, to be able to do these shows, and last year at this time we were in Tokyo, we've been in Sydney, we've been in London, we've been able to go around and just poll the audience and see what's going on. But this wave is happening around the world, and the AI is on everyone's top of list and the radar, that everyone wants to be able to act on it, but they want to be able to do it in real time, but to be able to do it in a way that can drive measurable outcomes. So what we've decided today is we want to put together a panel to be able to help educate everybody to be able to go deeper into this. And how do we unlock this? How do we get this data out? How do we get it into production? And so I'm very thrilled to be joined by three panelists that can help us talk about this from a couple of different vantage points. So I guess I'll let everybody introduce themselves really quick, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Roth. I'm a director at Slalom Consulting, and I lead our customer data strategy and marketing analytics team for North America.
Awesome. My name is Brian Lepre. I'm a senior manager on our marketing, messaging, and personalization team at Capital One. I lead our data foundations team.
Hi, I'm John Williams. I lead the global agency partnerships team at AWS.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here. We're going to get right into it. I think one of the quotes and the things that Jeff had up is an MIT quote that 95% of the pilots that are in AI fail at the current time. So the first question I wanted to start with, just to get the conversation rolling, is, in your opinion, what is the cost of data that never makes it into production?
Go first. So there's the real capital cost, and I think Jeff mentioned that too. If data can be expensive.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really real thing that people have to understand, because while a lot of companies are starting to collect a lot of data, this AI hype is driving a lot of just this interest in having more data, having more context on your customers. At the same time, a lot of companies are going through cost optimization exercises too. And so there's a really real cost to that data. And so if you don't want that data to be part of the cost optimization exercise, you actually have to show value out of it too. So I think there's a really real capital expenditure cost. There's a really real loss of revenue cost if data is just sitting somewhere and not being used to increase revenue, increase the customer experience so you can drive more revenue. There's that piece. And then I think there's also just this opportunity cost of not testing things to learn more about your customers too. Because if they don't respond to it, okay, how do we fix it to get them to respond to it? Or if they don't use a certain thing, great, that's a data point that you collected around them that you don't try in the future. So I think there's the revenue cost, there's the capital expenditure cost, and then there's the learning cost that comes with that too.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely hear you on the platform cost there. They're getting this. I think there's a few for me beyond that as well. The investment in platform to help make that data really actionable, right? What you're missing out on not actioning that data, as well as what you've invested to make that platform really well managed and operable, that then is just kind of sitting idle as you are scaling up new data, or as you have new use cases evolve, where that platform then becomes something that you need to go in and fix before you even got started on your first use case. The other side I'd point to is the consumer side, both internal and external. There's so many teams that are knocking on the door for data across the board for their use cases. And what the cost of having this data never really get there to them is, well, they don't know where to go when they actually need this stuff. They don't have the trust of these solutions are there to meet their needs when they need them. And then from the customer lens, I know I'll pick on myself in a lot of customer stories of looking at my browser and saying, well, all this data is getting collected. I'm on the grid. What are you doing with it, right? What's going on? I'm still seeing the same stuff. I'm still seeing things that aren't really meeting my needs. Is this really worthwhile to continue to share so much across the board, and especially in this very data collection sensitive environment?
Yeah, I think it's, from my perspective, it's more the generational aspect that Jeff was talking a little bit earlier in his presentation. I think 75% of consumers are now using AI. The queries have grown 200% in the last year. There's been a 39% shift in query volume from SEO to GEO, specifically from Google. And about 14% of those are transacting from their query that they did in LLM today. And that's only going to continue to accelerate. And you looked at that hype cycle, I think it's 33 years for internet penetration into 65% of the global population, 18 years for mobile applications into 65% of the population, 3 years to 50% awareness for Gen AI. But now with agentic AI, it's hockey sticking. And so the cost for you not to be involved in that conversation because your roadmap doesn't allow you, just to give you an example, I was in a conversation at around, literally a similar event to this last week, but a round table afterwards with a customer. I said, what's your biggest problem? He said, well, we know the generative AI use cases and we're convinced we need to do them as a business, but my IT pipeline is going to get it to me in 2 years. I think the biggest problem / opportunity is to have the board level conversation and the executive level conversation to enable your data to be vector embedded and enabled for queries, to have the right scalability capabilities for your company, and then for the right guardrails and security and everything else to be in place, so you can leverage your data for generative AI, for marketing, but also for any other application use case in your business, because you can transform various workflows across your enterprise, leveraging that data foundation that's been secured and built at your company.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept because I think I've heard for years every company says we're data driven, right? I mean, it's how you are informed and how you make decisions in real time. But if the data you are talking about isn't powering those decisions, it's just kind of expensive storage, right? Because it's not able to help satisfy the needs of the client. And so I think, Ryan, from your perspective, just with Capital One, right? Whenever you look at the gap, if I think about the gap between the data you collect and then the data that you actually drive value with, what does that look like to you inside of one of the largest banks in the world?
Yeah, it's a difficult tightrope to walk, right? Of data that you collect to data you activate. I once had one of our consumers, one of our data sets, say it's like drinking through the fire hose, right? You have so much data out there, event level data, customer data, whatever that looks like, and it's very hard to make heads or tails of it. At the same time, there's so many specific use cases that come in that need a bespoke type of standardization or aggregation on top of that, where you could always be chasing the tail of it. I think it's little bit of an exercise in making sure that your stakeholders are really aware of what is out there from the collection point to the activation, and working backwards from what do you really want to activate this data towards. You can always get more. You can always continue to invest in your data infrastructure, but being able to do that in a way that is activation and use case driven, and then working backwards from those end goals that you have and those experiences you want to impact, I think really does make the difference for those consumers.
That's helpful to know, because whenever I think about creating urgency to move beyond a pilot stage, sounds like you guys have to work yourself through a process to get to the light and have this in production. Is that correct?
Definitely. And thinking about getting beyond that pilot stage, I think there's a lot of good and bad side of driving a lot of those pilots. The good being you can test and learn. The bad being you have to be ready to test and learn. It's not all going to work, and in fact, a lot of times it doesn't. Having the clear understanding of the outcomes you want to drive and the way you're going to measure that is really important to make sure that that test and learn cycle is there from the get-go, between your product and your tech leadership as well, to say, not only do we feel convicted in this investment from a foundational level, but we know where it's headed, we know what the fallbacks are, and we know where we're headed with it next.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think in many cases, like where we see our clients get stuck a little bit is that it is driven a little bit too much by use cases that are not necessarily aligned to like a customer experience that you're trying to create.
Absolutely.
And so I always see the customer experience in many cases as like the great equalizer, because every part of a business is trying to deliver a better customer experience. Even the IT team that has a 2-year long backlog, they're doing what they can in their heart of hearts, right, to improve the customer experience for that business. And so I think in some cases it's aligning on what is a big customer experience problem that we have that we want to solve, and then how do we actually do that? Because not everybody, like you and I are nerds, so we're going to understand like the metadata and like the different attributes that you're going to tag to a customer. Most of the organization is not going to do that. And so if you can root it in like, what are we trying to do for our customer? In many cases, then you can start to break it down in ways that a lot of the different parts of the organization can understand. And so I think like that's a big piece too, because then everyone's like, okay, we want to fix this problem and drive this metric. And then you create the feedback loops to be able to do that so that everybody knows how they're doing. And I see that as a really like great way to start to actually activate the right data in something that's super meaningful.
And to scale it at the enterprise level, right? It goes beyond individual use cases or specific experiences you want to get to, and more, what are the really foundational aspects we want to address about that customer experience?
Yeah, but I think you're right. Like I think the testing and learning piece, and that's why I talk about the opportunity cost of not activating data. It's, you need to test it and figure it out. You can't you can't just like roll something out and think it's going to work, right? And so a lot of our clients who are launching some of the AI use cases are doing it to 1%, 5%, 10%, incrementally learning and seeing how some of those things are, like optimizing the model, optimizing the experience, learning a lot along the way, and then starting to roll that out more and more so that they can show proof, because proof in many cases is going to help drive alignment and it's going to help drive scale.
Yeah, completely agreed.
And I think that going from experimentation to production,
Yeah.
it's just fascinating to look at all the different layers that you're talking about. And I don't know, John, with your perspective, if you think about what Heather's talking about with the 1%, the 5%, I mean, how do the brands you work with innovate to be able to up-level and optimize these experiences at scale?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I talked about the roadmap component earlier. And so a lot of our partner, we work with all of the major holding companies and a lot of the systems integrations that have a CX and advertising and marketing arm, including obviously Heather at Slalom. and one of the biggest problems that we've identified with them is the marketing organization trying to understand what are the actual data assets they need to have, right? And so is it 10, is it 150 different data sources? What's the number? And I think historically there was a lot of concern that would go into IT and then that would take 8 to 10 or 12 months. And they were like, you know what, it's just too long for me. I might have left the company by the time I get this POC done, right? And so there's an opportunity now with an agentic process to reduce the timeline of the transformation of the data, the sourcing and the transformation of that data, and produce accelerators that do things in a few weeks now to get the data prepped for these specific use cases and drive outcomes, and then rinse and repeat, et cetera. So I think we're going to see a lot of work happening with various companies on what are those data prep accelerators that we can build with agentic AI to enable specific outcomes and use cases that then form a sort of a tapestry, if you will, of a major workflow transformation for customers. Yeah. And I think that's the way that we break it down. Whether that's 5%, 10%, or specific use cases. And the faster you move, the more sort of leash you get given to do broader transformations. Sort of the other area that we see, I think, as a massive opportunity for everybody is transforming workflows. So we talked about the difference between Gen AI and agentic AI. So Gen AI, a lot of people focus on point use cases like the transcoding of a meeting and the notes that you get from that, et cetera, sort of incremental gains. So like, feeding your horse better food, et cetera, to go a little bit faster versus building a car or an airplane. And I think there's an opportunity for everyone to build their airplane, right? You can transform hyper-personalization for your business. You can transform campaign management. You can transform marketing operations with agentic processes. And that's really only become possible, I think, with the technology over the past 6 months. Now it's about getting the change management and the mandate to go and do the work. So I think that's a big component of it is like we have the use cases. We can get into talk about that in just a sec, but we have the use cases, we have the examples. I think it's just getting the buy-in and the permission to go and do that as quickly as you possibly can.
I was smiling because it was when you said to feed the horse, better so it can run faster versus build a car, right? I feel like that's one of those things that we often get stuck in is we think that we can just continue down the path, but with the rate of change of the capability, I mean, it just is moving too fast. And I think whenever you look at the perspective you have, Heather, around talking with a customer and they're stuck in this purgatory, right? They want to feed the horse better. How do you get them, like what levers do you pull on to get them to start to think differently so that they break through and start to do things differently?
I mean, I think part of it is that customer experience piece that I was talking about too, of like everyone wants to drive a benefit for the customer and they want to drive a benefit for the company, but sometimes the goals aren't aligned. So I think like just taking a step back and saying like, what do we want to do and how are we going to measure it is like the first point, right? It is what is our common goal? And then it's just giving that mandate to a marketer or a business person and an IT person to say, you together need to go do this. And I think that helps the company take it out of experiment into like, how do we actually deliver this? Because there's a common goal there that is a customer experience activation. So I think that's a big piece is, again, like the customer experience alignment and then having that key metric and then aligning that. But I think the bigger piece too, and you were talking about this a little bit too, Ryan, it's like creating that feedback loop because you need to be able to measure it in order to do that. You can't fix anything that you're not measuring, right? You can't optimize anything that you're not measuring. And so having those feedback loops and being able to like quickly be able to learn from it and build on it with that common goal in mind, I think is a lot of what we see, helping clients break out of that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we had talked about earlier was like the data itself isn't the hero, the decisions are. And like, so to look at the signals and to think about it, and Ryan, from your perspective within Capital One, like what separates the teams in your world from that activation and decision-making role from the teams that use data, right, to those that act on data?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think really for a lot of the operationalization of it, it breaks down to having an ecosystem of data or understanding of data to just meet specific goals or use cases like we were talking about versus really embedding that to the process, right? Knowing where data fits throughout that pipeline. I really like what you were saying, John, about helping to increase the operational efficiency, right? To have the car run rather than the horse for the end user, but also just inside our own walls, right? How are people relating back to this data ecosystem and understanding it, being able to make the right infrastructure investments in the modeling and activation that's needed to get that data to the right place rather than just have it all, right? The right tools are in the tool belt. The tool belt isn't expanding. And I think that's very important for us and making sure that there is a clear pathway to embedding that data throughout the activation process rather than just bits and pieces throughout.
That makes sense. And then whenever we talk about, John, some of the things around scaling, right, and being able to meet the needs, the way you were presenting and pitching and talking about the agentic future, I mean, how do we then build to scale?
Yeah, I mean, as you think about what does the agentic future mean and what are you building for, and I'll answer the question, but this is a good incremental context is, what are you measuring, right? So everything's shifting from reach and frequency to what I'd call contextual empathy, because the technology is now here for you to provide generative AI tracking basically the behavioral elements, the data elements, the creative assets, the placements, et cetera, in real time. So enabling you to have the right message, right time, right place, but in the right context for that person at that moment. So you have to track things differently. So if you think about what that means in terms of the creative assets that you have, that turns into metadata, which is a currency for your business because you can associate a value to it ongoing into the future forever. And I think, so what's required to do that from a generative AI perspective is pretty profound. And so at AWS, we're providing people with the ability to have access to a variety of large language models through Bedrock. You can choose Anthropic, Meta, Claude, et cetera, and obviously Amazon through an API. You can augment those capabilities with your own data assets. And we also provide the scalability and security through AWS to enable you to do that in a cost-efficient manner, but also make sure you've got the security and guardrails and capabilities built around it because it's all happening through basically an API call, so it's serverless. So those are some of the tools and the frameworks that we're building, but in terms of the amount of data that's used to do those things, because of everything changing, it's pretty profound, so you need to make sure that you're planning for that.
I mean, I think that the way Jeff presented in the slide, we're building the agentic front door. I thought that was pretty interesting. And it's a great way to put it because we have to build for the future. We have to plan ahead. And so whenever I think about the AI piece, it's not the finish line, it's a tool, it's capability. And to look at what we were showing with SIA, it's amazing, and it's got a long way to go, but it's still absolutely amazing to think you can ask the questions and receive the feedback, get the pointers, and get through things where you would previously have done, a Google-based search or done something on our doc site or been in the community looking, and that greatly accelerates the ability for the individual to unlock that value. But like you mentioned with the guardrails, to have the ability to know where to stop. She doesn't know how to recommend where we go eat. She can give us the guidance on how to set up a Amazon Ads API for measuring conversions, talk about the things that are more critical to be able to drive value and return on ad spend, and ultimately increase conversion. So that all is coming from a domain of knowledge blended with those models to be able to not only train it, but then help it inform our users. And to have 1,000 conversations a month is amazing. That's just continuing to expand.
Can I make a point on SIA real quick? Because I find this really interesting. Because we talk a lot about like how valuable the data is that goes into AI, but I think the data that comes out of AI is just as valuable.
Yeah.
And I think you were talking about this too. So like, when I see SIA, I'm like, okay, is SIA capturing in a data layer behind her what Jeff is asking her and using that contextual data to say, how might we need to improve our content around this? Where are people getting stuck, and how do we need to retrain SIA's model? And I'm just using SIA as an example because you brought her up.
Yeah.
But like, I think that and learning around that and using that to optimize any sort of model behind AI.
Yep.
Is going to be just as important as like the data preparation that's happening, because then you can, I think we're going to get to orchestration at some point, but imagine the data that you're getting from SIA to say, Heather actually did put in her business email and wanted Tealium to reach out to her. How can I potentially give a Tealium rep really good context into what Heather was talking about?
Yep.
Because you're capturing a lot of that data on the back end. So the point of that is like the data going into AI is very important. The data coming out of AI and how you activate that in the rest of your ecosystem, I think is also just as important.
Yeah, I think I really like the way you put that, John, of currency for your business in that metadata. And I think that AI-driven metadata of what contextually is presented here, and how does that play a role in the actual experience, right? Both for the platform that's running it and the person who's interfacing with it.
Right.
And the marketing team that can build on
Right.
it, and the customer success team that can have context and everything like that too.
That again, I think we mentioned this earlier, but that's how you help to scale across the different folks inside the business that are trying to use this, right? It's not just knowing what is working and what you can continue to drive. It's where does this fit into the puzzle, and where can it?
Right.
Getting it out of the dashboard and like making it usable.
Totally.
Yep.
And the orchestration across the channels is really just highlighting, well, what if those agentic types of capabilities could not only answer the question, but then prompt and say, would you like me to set that up in your profile? I can get it going right now. I can start the process for you. Those are the places where we're going, right? And we want our customers to be able to drive customer experience doing the same thing, leveraging our capabilities with the Tealium platform to help usher that in. But the speed at which this is going is, I've never seen anything like it, and so the tokenization stuff that Jeff was talking about with identity tokens and value tokens, I mean, it's really going to be that trust-based exchange. And so whenever I think about across the channels and within getting that started, what are some of your perspectives on the way that we think about how those channels can be activated, how the orchestration is going to really support this?
I think orchestration right now sometimes is considered like IT piping, like the plumbing. It's stuck in the IT team, but I think it's actually like an experience strategy versus IT plumbing. So, and I go back because I am a CX consultant who loves data, right? I go back to the activation is like, how do you make a customer feel recognized and not retargeted? How do you learn enough about them that you're orchestrating their entire experience and they understand like across every touch point that you know them? And so it really is, again, taking that customer experience lens and it's breaking it down into the data that's required for that so that you are figuring out that actual like orchestration strategy behind the customer experience strategy.
Yeah. I think it's it's a couple of things. It's what are you giving permission for your agent to interact with, or whether it's your credit card agent, or if it's your website agent, or if it's your application agent, and does that change in terms of what you provide them access to, even to the extent of like wearable attributes that you may want to integrate into a platform. And then on the other side, as the provider of the agent to the end customer, what's the short-term and long-term memory you're producing in it, so it has context in the moment for the situation that it's in, but also, to your point, so it's learning the context over time and integrating that. But then also, what's the persona rules that you're putting into it? Like, am I an HR agent? Am I a travel agent? What's the personality of the company that I want to fulfill and portray to people as they're engaging with me? And all of this is built into that MCP protocols that you talked about, and that tunes, that goes into the large language model as a brain, but provides it with a reasoning framework to extend its capabilities that then goes into the outputs that it provides. So you need to be thinking about all of those steps in that path of journey.
Yeah, I really like that as the way to kind of work back from it. I think, to your point, it often gets treated as that IT pipeline. I think knowing that context and where to connect the dots is what takes it out of pipeline world and into efficiency world, right? You're investing in well-managed data platforms that help to start the top of the funnel. You're investing in these moments that are the translation layer at the end of where do you want to plug it in. The way that you take the pipeline out of the middle from just being, connect those loose dots to really knowing what's going on is that deeper context and being able to really reach the efficiency of those orchestration platforms as part of the experience rather than just a tool to get from A to B.
And I think as we've talked about before, you can't separate activation from trust.
Yeah.
Right? And this is a big challenge because I'm curious, Ryan, with the way that you look at Capital One is part of one of the most regulated industries on the planet. And whenever I think about it, it's like, how do you embed trust and compliance into this? Now that we've talked about the agentic, we've talked about how to choose your weapon, how to get this going, how do you then make this something where you know that you have the support, that you're rolling this out in a trusted and compliant way?
Well, we choose our weapons very carefully, that's for sure. I think leading from the foundation of data use and management policies and bringing your governance along the way from the get-go really does help, right? It's getting the understanding of where you want to get to at that end experience side and marrying that in with what the governance needs to be to get you there. Rather than trying to work backwards from, well, here's all the ways that we want to use this, and then going up to governance and saying, well, that's not going to work at all, right? It's being a little bit more proactive about that. I think embedding a lot more into the process as well helps, right? There are lots of stage gates throughout that. It's not just A to B. Making sure that you have the right data access policies, data use policies, and monitoring along the way to say, here's where we are hitting our goals, but also here's where we have those restrictions, and we want to make sure that there are those checks along the way. It's not just that we're trying to flood the gates with all this data to start it out. And as much as you can, right, building that into the way that you approach things like your experience design, your segmentation, right, the way that you're seeing what can be possible there is really important.
That's very helpful because I think whenever I look at the compliance, it's not really the blocker, it's more like the unlock.
Yep.
Right, and getting that activated in a trusted environment is absolutely critical.
And getting to that, right, like future-focused statement as well, right? It's not just about how you are using your data today, it's about how you're going to use it tomorrow and how your platform can help adapt to that.
Absolutely. And I think whenever we start to look at the discussion, obviously will continue as we go into the breaks and other things today, but when I think about just going from the talk about this and putting it in action, for the folks that are in the room, we've got a lot of great brands represented here today. I'm sure people have a lot of questions. And I think a lot of people we've heard from in our community are frustrated that they're stuck in pilot mode and they want to be able to really unlock, because the POCs don't build businesses. It's decisions and people putting things into action. So I'd say whenever we kind of recap what we've talked about the starting with the data foundation, aligning the teams, getting everybody going. But one of the things I'd love to ask each of you in the closing bit is, what's one action you would recommend that we take to everybody in the room to be able to turn your data into value faster?
I think it's like, pick a big problem that your company has and figure out a way to fix it as a team. So your data doesn't have to be perfect to get started. And in fact, you'll probably learn way more as you start to pilot it. And I think we've talked about it too. It is like, start on a problem, go, like test it, learn from it, create those feedback loops to get people excited about it, fix it, launch it, and then that's how AI starts, and that's how people get excited about, okay, what can we do next? What can we do next? And I think like with the right things in mind, like privacy, data privacy is huge, right? And you have to build that through from the start. But I would say like don't let perfect get in the way of just starting. Start with something that's really gonna solve a big problem, get people excited about it, show the proof, and then keep going.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And I think that really breaks down to me to early validation with your partners, right? But getting them on board from early stages and making them part of that process, right? It should be very collaborative across product, across tech, across design to make sure that there's a clear understanding of that. And making sure that throughout that you have that clear strategy for testing and learning and measurement, right? It's about defining the goals that you have here, but keeping an open mind to where those could evolve in the future.
John?
I think talk to your partners. You've got a great, amazing company like Tealium that can help you with your data foundations, do the work. A bunch of experts out there at the tables, companies like AWS that have proven use cases and demonstrative examples of how you drive value for your business. It's, we're here. Like there's no reason for you not to get going and doing these things because we have proven success and we can help you with your business. So I think it's all about just moving forward and executing.
Yeah, well, it's a great way to close up the session because I first want to thank you, Heather, Ryan, John, for your time today. This is great to have, and we will continue the discussion. We've got the sessions, we've got the experts, we've got everybody out here, but we'll keep the conversation going at the break. Thank you all.